For both of you, yes. Okay, and Lily will get this one.
Is it close enough? It's here. Is it close
No, you'll take it a little bit closer, but let me just open. Okay. 12:45. Thank you. Okay. Good afternoon to all of you. I'm very happy to open the first panel of our conference. Our panel on gendered violence towards women during the Holocaust will explore the sexual violence, the bodily degradation, and the unique survival strategies of women that women developed. In this panel, we will ask a complex, necessary question or questions. How did gender shape the violence of the Holocaust, and how did it specifically target Jewish women? We will have 3 lectures. Each one of them will take 15 minutes, and during the remaining time, the audience will have the opportunity to ask them questions. Our first lecturer is Professor Dr. Lily Halpert Zamir. She is the co-founder and academic director of WHISC. She is a professor of Holocaust and Gender Studies and a member of the Academic Council, as well as the head of the Center for Women's and Gender Studies at the David Yellin Academic College of Education in Jerusalem, Israel. Professor Zamir serves as the Presidential Advisor on Gender Equality and as the Commissioner of Sexual Harassment Treatment and Prevention at the college. She has published several books, 7 of them which deals with the Holocaust, as well as dozens of articles in Hebrew and English that focuses on Holocaust and gender studies. And one monography, I think you mentioned it, Lily, on Danilo Kish. Her last book, which is very important to mention, is Lily Kashticher, the woman who wrote in Auschwitz, and it was published by Moreshet in 2022. And she will talk about enemy or ally, the female body, gendered violence from scripture, right? Yeah. Scripture to the Holocaust and October 7th. And please, Lily.
Thank you very much, Batya. Thank you very much, Batya. I'll try to be sharp. I have 15 minutes and the clock is in front of me. Okay, so enemy or ally, the female body. In my work, I would like to overview the violations against women's bodies throughout history, especially during war and genocide. The female body became both territory and trophy, violated, humiliated, redefined within ethnic and/or national boundaries, from the biblical times throughout history, ending October 7th, 2023. I would like to start with the biblical issue, the law of Yefat Toar, the beautiful woman, the beautiful captive woman. Throughout different events of genocide and the Holocaust, and the legend of the 93 young women who committed suicide in the Krakow ghetto, all of them are based on the issue of the female body, and it started with the Yefat Toar, the fact that the female body is a part of a war, or the war. The military historian, Professor Martin van Creveld, who is known as a misogyn, once said to me, you know, it's much better to be raped than killed in the battlefield. I think that we have to agree that this statement is both wrong and dangerous. The female body has long been viewed as both a symbol of reproduction, because it's the woman, the female in nature, also with the mammals, that is part of reproduction, and also a source of distress. Not just during wartime, throughout history, from early monotheistic religions, throughout the Crusade, through the 20th century, 2 world wars, totalitarian regimes, and ongoing conflicts today, the woman's body have repeatedly been used as battleground. Let's start with the famous biblical Yefat Toar. What does it mean? It means that when a nice woman is taken in captivity, she might be used like the soil by the conqueror. But unlike sold and cattle, she can't be sold later on. So you use her, either you keep her or you just kill her, but it's yours. You captive the land, you captive the goods, and also the female body, who is a part of the goods. In Hebrew language, we have a very strange expression of violence, even when we talk about loving relationship. You conquer a woman, lichbosh isha, we say. What does it mean? Why do you conquer her? So we see that it's a kind of historical tradition that goes on, and it goes in so many different ways in different times, but it's always the female body at the center. After the Second World War, the international law viewed the rape of women as a marker of genocide and war crime. Yet, still, even today, it's committed almost every day, and nothing is done about it. Yes, people talk about it and they shook their head, but this is it. According to recent research, 2024, done by Naomi Halpert, she's bringing different sides of genocides, and the common thing is always the rape of women as a symbol of the war. The examples that she's using is the Yazdi women rape by ISIS, 2014 to 2017, or the mass rapes by Tutsi and Hutu women in Rwanda, April to July 1994, rape of Bosnia-Herzegovina women, and going through the Holocaust and going to October 7th. We don't have the exact numbers about October 7th yet. Rape is one of the most extreme expressions of the conqueror to humiliate the male society in the conquered region. The message is clear. You failed. You men, you failed. You male failed in protecting your land. You male failed in protecting your faith, and you failed in protecting your women. So we may say that in a certain point, the failure of the man who was defeated is paid by the female body, the women who are raped and tortured. In Israel nowadays, one could hope for better, but you cannot assume that modernity shields rape survivors, neither from rejection nor from stigma. Patriarchal attitudes still exist. People often ask women who survived genocide and rape, what have you done to survive? How come that you were only raped and not butchered? Interesting question. In Holocaust survivor cases, we can see even more extreme examples because women were in certain places, certain Orthodox societies, expected to commit suicide. This expectation we can see in the legend of the 93 young girl who committed suicide in the Krakow ghetto, I think which never happened. It was proved that it never happened. But still the legend carries a very clear message. When you are in danger of being abused or raped, it's better to commit suicide. Now, this, of course, has very deep historical, religious roots. For example, we have in the Midrash a story about 400 young girls who had heard a rumor that they are going to be raped. So they jumped from the roof into the ocean to die. But why? I mean, it was not really that the rapists were at their door, but still, to be sure, better to be safe than sorry. So better to die than be in danger to be raped. If we go back to the ghetto Krakow story, there is very interesting that one of the rabbis post-war said that these martyrs, the holy martyrs, gave our more in their death than they could. Pay attention to the extended. They could give in their lives. Had the story been true, but it's a legend. It never happened. But still the expectation is that you as a female in your life, you can achieve a noble achievement. Oh yeah, but with your death, you can. So this is something that we should pay attention. Of course, Yad Vashem denied the story, the legend of the 93 girls, and so did a very interesting research done by, she's a professor of law, Nomi Levenkorn, and she even found the sources of the legend. It's a story written by Yud Lamed Peretz, Three Presents is called, Shalosh Matanot for the Hebrew speakers. And one of these presents is that a young girl, the rabbi's daughter, who was supposed to be taken as the lover or sex, whatever, for one of the Gentile leaders, she heard about it and she said, but beforehand, I want one gift, and the gift was to permit her to commit suicide. So those sources were very popular during the Holocaust, and women in many cases were expected to do so. And if you didn't, as most women, thanks God, did not go through the legend and those messages, so the question was, what the heck have you done if you survived? How come you survived? I would like to draw your attention to Nazi Germany, 1942. And I'm referring to Nazi Germany, not Germany in a whole. The Lebensborn program encouraged German women to reproduce without any connection if they are married or they are married and the husband is on the front. But if you are a female and your womb is still in good shape, you owe to the fatherland children, because we are in wartime and we need more fighters. So here is again the female body that is used as a tool. This time it's not Jewish women, but still it's the female body And nobody asked the question, but what about your feelings? What about your personal situation? No, you're a female, you have a womb, then you have to reproduce for the right. At the same time, Slav women that were taken into prison were, of course, sterilized. In the Jewish ghettos, pregnant women were punished. You were not allowed to bear children. Yes, some women risked their lives and were pregnant and bore children. Unfortunately, very little of them survived. So it's very interesting to see those things. Women had to pay with their bodies in very different situation during the Holocaust. In the ghettos, to get work permission many times from the Judenrats. You had many times to pay with your body when you wanted to join the partisans, especially if you were a Jewish woman. And obviously you had no weapon to bring with you. So you want to be with us in the forests, maybe to fight, maybe to be a cook, maybe to be a nurse, but in any case, not maybe, be the lover of the one who wants to use you. In one of my researchers, I was interviewing a few Holocaust survivors. One of them told me about the sexual violence that she lived through in the concentration camp. It was not only forced nudity, it was also public games. People sitting in a round and a young female in the middle of the circus, and dogs that were trained to rape them were used them. She told, I was only 15 years old. I didn't know that the dog is also dangerous. I thought that only the Nazi man and the capo is dangerous. I can't tell you what happened to me. No, I can't. But till then, I never was afraid from dogs. 50 years later, I can't see a dog. She passed last year, by the way. She was 101 years old in Kiryat Chaim. Another survivor told me then when she married, she couldn't tell what happened to her. And once she tried and her husband said, I'm not interested. Your past is past, our present is present. And it's very interesting. How come that the closest person doesn't want to hear about her past? Rapes were often allowed, and mutilation was also a part of it. Rape of an individual by an individual is different than group rapes. When it's a group, it has a national masculine message. We the rulers can do what we can. And we can because we are the conquerors. Carol Rittner, in her groundbreaking study, 1993, she was the first person to ask, what about the women? But she was the first person also to bring to our attention that it's very, very hard to collect evidence, because usually people want to have the golden proof. Tell your story, but I need the golden proof. There is no golden proof in rape. Not in rape in wartime. Women don't talk about it. Many women, especially in religious Islamic societies, were killed after they survived rape. Because the moment that you were raped by the conqueror, you are no more a part of us. You are a part of our shame. The shame that I mentioned at the beginning. The shame, which is the proof that I, the man, I failed. I failed in protecting my country, my faith, and my women. As I show in my paper, which is very long, and since I'm very merciful and kind, and Batya is very tough, I'm not going to bother you with all the details. You can read it later on when the paper is published. But unlike other genocides, when rape was used to break community bonds, the Nazi goal with the Jews and Roma was not only to break any community. especially that those communities did not have any geopolitical conflict with the Nazis, because Jews and Romas did not have free land, and they didn't have any political issues. I'm finishing, Batya. So I would like to conclude with the very annoying quotation from Primo Levi. He said, no one will, in his books, those who sank and those who were Hashokim Banitzulim, and those who survived. The drone and the saved. Thank you so much, Gideon. You saved me now. So Primo Levi is writing in his book, no one will survive. No one will remain to tell the story. And if by any accident one person survives and tries to tell, no one is going to believe. It's not a story that can be believed. And this is why I think that female stories about their bodies and what happened to them during the Holocaust and other genocides, there is no audience for the story. Women are afraid to speak up, because even if I tell, who is going to believe me? Thank you for your attention. And one moment was left. No, I started late. I'll argue you.
Thank you very much, Lily, for your knowledgeable and interesting overview.
Thank you.
Our second speaker is Larissa-Marie Lömpel. She's an MA candidate at the University of Haifa. She holds a BA in History and Gender Studies from the University of Brutin, Göttingen, and Ben-Gurion University of the Negev. Throughout her studies, she has been actively engaged in Holocaust education and research, and her core academic focus lies on gendered experiences during the Holocaust, particularly sexualized violence in concentration camps. And today she will talk about gendered dimension of sexualized violence in Auschwitz, a comparative analysis of male and female experiences. The floor is yours.
Before I start, can I get the presenter to...
No,
I have a slide and I need to change the...
So maybe we have to move right.
I'll move.
We have to move right. You can't see it, or you can see it.
Yes? לא
Yeah.
מפריעים?
Okay.
אבל אני רוצה, טוב, אני תכף אעלה.
Okay. Then thank you very much.
תפתח את זה במחשב שלה.
Can you hear me? Is it okay?
לא, יש כאן טקסט.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm very grateful to WHISC and the Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory for inviting me to speak at this conference today. Before I begin, I want to make a brief disclaimer. My research is still in its early stages. I started working on this topic only a few months ago for one of my MA classes. So what I present today is only the starting point of an ongoing research. So I very much welcome your comments, questions, feedback, and everything you have. I like to begin by reading two excerpts from video testimonies of Holocaust survivors Laura Varon and Fred Wolf. They have several things in common. First, they were both Jewish, which led to their imprisonment in Auschwitz. Second, both became victims of sexualized violence there. Laura Varon was born in 1926 on the island of Rhodes. In 1944, she and her family were deported to Auschwitz, where most of them were murdered. In the camp, she was raped by 3 SS members. In a 1996 Yad Vashem interview, she recalled what was done to her, and I would like to read it to you. Doesn't work. Yeah? Okay. She said, and all of a sudden the doors opened and 3 Nazis came and they dragged us on the floor. They violated us, sexually violated us. They smelled like beer, you know, they raped us. 3 Nazis. They took us on the floor and I felt it because we were naked. And the floor was so cold. I still feel the cold of that pavement. Fred Wolf was born in 1924 in Merl, a small village in Western Germany. He was deported to Auschwitz in the spring of 1943. A few weeks after his arrival, he was raped by 2 camp functionaries. In a 1997 interview with the WHISC Foundation, he recounted what happened. One day, when the other prisoners from his barrack had left for work, someone told Fred he could stay behind and directed him to Block 12. There, 2 male functionaries awaited him. He described what followed next. Then he told me, "Put your pants down." I said, "What do you mean, put your pants down?" "Put your pants down." Bent over, and here they raped me. I was stunned. I didn't even know what happened to me. What are they doing? First thing that ever happened to me. I chose to begin with these 2 testimonies because I wanted to give the survivors a voice, allowing us to hear firsthand the realities of sexualized violence in Auschwitz. They also highlight that such violence was not limited by gender and affected both women and men, which inspired my research. My research aims to analyze how gender shaped the experiences of sexualized violence in Auschwitz. It examines both the shared vulnerabilities of female and male prisoners and the specific patterns shaped by gender. This research, and this is really important for me to point out, does not aim to establish a hierarchy of suffering or to compare the severity of victims' experiences. For me, there's no competition in suffering. All prisoners endured unimaginable things regardless of gender. However, I believe that recognizing gender dimensions of the Holocaust is crucial. For too long, sexualized violence was understood exclusively as violence against women done by men, and the experiences of male victims were overlooked. By acknowledging the experiences of all survivors and the ways in which gender shaped both the violence and its aftermath, we gain a fuller understanding of how Nazi persecution operated, and we honor victims whose trauma has remained unacknowledged for decades. Before going into the details, let me briefly outline the structure of my presentation. I will begin by addressing the limitations of my studies, followed by a brief definition of the term sexualized violence. I will then discuss both the similarities and differences in the experiences before concluding with some final remarks. It's important to keep in mind the limitations of my study. Recognizing sexualized violence comes with considerable methodological challenges. The conclusions are based on the sources we have, which represent only a small part of the overall picture. Most victims perished before they could even recount the experiences, and even among survivors, not everyone chose or felt able to provide testimony, given the huge stigma attached to such violence. The likelihood of reporting also varied depending on the victim's gender and the type of violence experienced. Let me begin by clarifying terminology. I use the term sexualized violence rather than sexual violence because it covers a wider range of acts, not only penetration. These acts were not necessarily about sexual desire, but more about power. So sexuality, sexual organs, and sexual symbolism were used to control, intimidate, and humiliate prisoners. In Auschwitz, sexuality itself became a weapon embedded in the camp's system of domination and dehumanization. In Auschwitz, sexualized violence manifested in multiple forms, including forced nudity during the intake procedure and in various other contexts, non-consensual touching, medical experiments targeting the reproductive organs, sexual exploitation, including sex in exchange for resources, and forced labor in the camp brothels, and of course, rape. With this broader understanding in mind, let us look at how sexualized violence affected both men and women. Testimonies show that both genders were subjected to such violence. In the camp, everyone was extremely vulnerable because of huge power imbalances between the SS guards and the prisoners. From arrival, the SS stripped prisoners of bodily autonomy. So everyone, regardless of gender, age, nationality, or race, was forced to undress and undergo invasive body searches. The intake procedure, as Brigitte Heitmeier calls it, was an unavoidable experience of sexualized violence. This initial violation set a pattern that persisted throughout the imprisoners. Prisoners could become victims at any time. The regime standardized specific forms of sexualized violence, including forced nudity and non-consensual touching, which became part of daily life in Auschwitz. Additionally, some prisoners, depending on age, race, and gender, faced the risk of being selected for medical experiments or forced labor in the camp brothels. For example, Dr. Klauberg, who performed sterilizations on women, especially selected women between the ages 20 and 30, often married women who had already given birth. So women who met these criteria therefore faced a higher risk of being selected. Both genders were subjected to a range of sexualized abuses. For both men and women, cases can be found for all the forms I already mentioned. So forced nudity, non-consensual touching, medical experiments, sexual exploitation, and rape. There are two more similarities I would like to highlight. First, both male and female prisoners were exposed to what we might call a dual system of abuse. They faced threats from SS personnel and from prisoner functionaries who exploited their power within the camp hierarchy. Second, perpetrators were overwhelmingly male, reflecting Auschwitz's male-dominated structure with around 8,000 SS men compared to only 200 women. This concentration of power in male hands enabled them to commit such acts. This, of course, doesn't mean that female perpetrators didn't exist, but such cases were far less common. Let us now turn to the differences. First, it is important to note that in general, women in Auschwitz were more often subjected to such violence than men. This difference was not only in numbers, but also in nature. Some forms of abuse targeted women exclusively. So, for example, only women were forced into prostitution in the camp brothels, and there was no equivalent for men. Because Auschwitz was a male-dominated space, this created particular dangers for women. While male prisoners were mostly under the control of other men, women were under the control of the opposite gender, facing threats not only as prisoners, but specifically as women. Let me give you an example of what I mean by that. For a woman, being forced to undress in front of male SS personnel during the intake procedure was not only humiliating. It was an act that the SS themselves sexualized. So guards mocked women's bodies, made comments about their private parts, and touched them without their consent. They turned the process into something eroticized for their own gratification. This continued in other situations, even in the minutes leading up to their murders. Leib Langfuß, a member of the Sonderkommando, described how SS personnel routinely sexually assaulted women entering the gas chambers. He said Oberscharführer Forst was standing at many transports at the door of the undressing room, touching the sexual organs of every young woman entering naked the gas bunker. There were also cases when SS men of all ranks were putting their fingers in the sexual organs of young, pretty women. Men reported such humiliations far less often, so in the end, one could say that the female body remained a sexual object. Another difference concerns the gender dynamics between perpetrators and victims. Since perpetrators were overwhelmingly male, this created distinct patterns. So for women, we're mainly talking about heterosexual violence, and for men, same-sex violence was very common. A further difference lies in the sources. So for women, there are relatively many testimonies, and for male victims, sources are far fewer and much harder to find. This doesn't necessarily mean that men experienced less violence. I would argue that it rather shows that gender norms shaped how survivors speak about it. So such violence is, of course, deeply stigmatizing for everyone, but for men in a different way. Traditional ideas of being a man, linking manhood with being strong and not being a victim made it extremely difficult for male survivors to speak about what happened to them. And many felt that their suffering was unspeakable or that people would not listen or not understand. Traditional Holocaust narratives reinforced this silence. For decades, researchers assumed that sexualized violence was something man did to women. As Zoe Waxman has argued, such narratives not only shaped academic discourses, but also influenced how survivors themselves spoke about their experiences. So when something that happened did not fit the established narrative of the Holocaust, survivors often feared that they would not be understood or that there would be no room to speak about what happened to them. One final point I want to mention is that assaults done by man to man carried a double stigma. First, as sexualized violence, and second, as homosexuality. Homosexual acts remained criminalized in countries like Germany and the United States for decades after the war. So male survivors of such violence faced not only trauma, but also the real risk of persecution, and if not persecution, judgment, if they spoke out. Let me return to Laura Veron and Fred Wolf, whose testimonies opened this presentation. Both were Jewish prisoners subjected to rape in Auschwitz, and both carried the trauma for decades. Yet, gender deeply shaped how each of them experienced this violence. Lara was targeted by SS personnel as a young woman in a system that eroticized female bodies. Fred was assaulted by prisoner functionaries who used the fact that homosexuality was illegal to silence him. These differences were not incidental. Gender shaped who was targeted, the forms of violence, their frequency, and how survivors spoke about it after the war. And recognizing these patterns helps us uncover forms of violence that remained invisible and shows that gender was central to Holocaust experiences. Only by acknowledging these differences, we can develop the comprehensive understanding that both scholarship and memory demand. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Larissa, for your direct approach of the sexualized violence in Auschwitz. And I think that a lot of questions arose from your lectures. Let's see what the audience will have to say later on. Our third speaker is Jovana Savić.
It's good.
Ooh, I succeeded. She graduated from the Faculty of Philology at the University of Belgrade with a degree in Serbian language and literature with South Slavic languages. Wow. She completed her master's degree in Serbian literature at the same faculty with a thesis that focuses on the connection between factography?
Yeah.
Wow. And fiction in 20th century Serbian literature. Currently, she is a PhD student with her research focuses on portrayal of violence against women and children during the Holocaust in Serbian literature. And she will talk about the violence of silence, the novels of Aleksandar, Tišma, as testimonies to the trauma of forced prostitution during the Holocaust. I mean, not specific place, or in general? In general. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and it's a great honor to be here today. So, Aleksandar Tišma was a Serbian writer born in Horgoš in 1924. His mother was Jewish and converted to Christianity before his birth. This fact later became a source of deep guilt for Tišma, as he felt he has escaped the suffering of his people. Tišma's work is marked by testimony, suffering, and ethical reflection. Starting from his literary approach, which combines photography and fiction, today we aim to explore the role of literature as a space in which silenced historical experiences, particularly women's experiences of sexual violence during the Holocaust, are expressed through ethical sensitivity and deep psychological insight. Tišma published the novel The Use of Men in 1976. The novel examines deeply neglected and marginalized topics such as forced prostitution in concentration camps, the existence of brothels, and medical experiments performed on women. Tišma offers a precise and unsettling description of sterilization. The historical narrative of the Holocaust has proven to be highly selective, particularly regarding the experiences of women. How long women's experiences during the Holocaust remained marginalized in scholarly and public interpretations is demonstrated by the fact that this issue was officially addressed at the end of the 20th century in 1999 during the annual Holocaust Research Conference. Due to misunderstandings about the context in which prostitution took place in the camps and the perception that it was voluntary, a significant cause of silence was also the shame experienced by the victims. As a result, in testimonies about sexual violence during the Holocaust, victims often referred to the violence they suffered in the third person, speaking not from the perspective of the victim, but rather as witnesses. In this context, literature assumes a significant role as one of the few spaces within the culture of remembrance where what history has neglected can be articulated. What makes literature a valuable tool for understanding and remembering these aspects of the Holocaust is its accessibility. While historical sources and official testimonies are often inaccessible to wider audiences, whether due to institutional barriers or specialized language, literary works serve as a medium that is closer and more approachable to the reader. However, this also raises the question of whether the representation of the Holocaust in art is ethically appropriate, and if so, under what circumstances. Many historical topics remain confined to the domain of academia or personal memory, which is why translating historical facts into the language of art becomes an important step in preserving the memory of the Holocaust within society beyond the academic community. Now that we have outlined the framework of the themes Aleksandar Tišma addressed in his novel The Use of Men, we can turn our attention to the novel itself, which illustrates the trauma resulting from continuous violence in the camps. It is important to emphasize here that the male-female character represents a phenomenon very characteristic of victims of sexual or other forms of violence. This phenomenon is described in psychology. Specifically, we drew on the work of Judith Herman, who states, "Traumatized people relive the moment of trauma, not only in their thoughts and dreams, but also in their actions." In the novel, this process is shown through the paradoxical experience of the male-female character, who, after leaving the camp, feels less safe than before. She continues to have sexual relationships, even though they cause her distress and pain. The following fragment from the novel depicts the self-destructive actions or self-use of the main character, Vera Kroner. She's frozen in loneliness. All around her are strangers, ghosts. Suddenly, she feels that by leaving the camp, she has left the only place where she was understood, where she was surrounded by true, close people. She sees the desolation carried with corpses. At the very moment she left it, she sees the twisted bodies of the hand guards, and she is almost ready to mourn them too, to kneel before them, take them down from the rope and cry out, "Beat me, I am yours." Tišma does not keep Vera alive by chance. As the only survivor of her family, she continues to live with the burden of trauma, a life that for her becomes a continuation of suffering and, paradoxically, the only space that feels familiar and safe. In the end, Vera takes her own life, unable to adjust to a reality no longer shaped by control, pain, and continuous violence. This act of suicide reflects the lasting power of trauma. Here lies the deepest paradox of trauma. A person who has been violently used by others gradually begins to use themselves. Tišma's literature is at its core a deep reflection on the time in which it was written. Rarely elsewhere can we so clearly see what human beings are capable of doing to others, but also what they are capable of doing to themselves. Tišma's sensitive portrayal of trauma becomes even more meaningful when placed within the broader context of how female experiences have historically been silenced or misunderstood. The limited availability of women's testimonies, along with the stigma often associated with victims of sexual violence, has contributed to interpretations in which even forced prostitution is sometimes seen as a matter of personal choice. Such views risk overlooking the reality of the camps marked by systemic violence and the loss of fundamental personal freedoms. Reducing forced prostitution to an act of voluntary sexual relations represents one of the most harmful narratives in the interpretation of gender-based violence in the camps. However, given the circumstances described, a crucial question arises. Is it even possible to speak of free will when a sexual act is presented as an alternative to death? If survival depends on physical submission, then the concept of free will is deeply and clearly compromised. In such a system of camp terror, it is worth considering whether victims can keep any sense of autonomy at all, even over their own bodies, in seemingly smaller decisions, like whether their hair will be cut or not. Taking into account all these aspects, uncertainties around the concept of free will, the long-standing marginalization of women's testimonies, and the tendency toward simplified interpretations, the literary voice that brings back the complexity and depth of victims' suffering becomes especially important. This is exactly what Tišma does in The Use of Men, where through the character of Vera Kroner, he shows violence from the inside, from the victim's own perspective, refusing to reduce her experience to sociological or statistical data. In this way, Tišma not only speaks for those who have been silenced, but also sets a moral framework where lack of choice is recognized and responsibility for violence is clearly identified. And I would like to end with an impression I had this summer when I attended a conference held at the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum. And anyone who has visited Auschwitz knows there is a room with two tones of women's hair. And over time, the hair is slowly disappearing due to natural processes that unfortunately cannot be stopped. But the memory of those women, their names, their traumas, must not disappear with it. That is something we must never allow. Thank you.
Many, many, many thanks to the three lecturers for the thought-provoking lectures, ideas, and questions. Now, participants can address or direct questions to the lecturers.
Can I ask you what's the... I would like if you can tell us what's the name of Tišma's book in Serbian?
Upotreba čoveka.
Čovek.
Da. Upotreba čoveka.
Which is interesting because most of the book is dealing with women, not men.
Yeah, exactly.
So it should be translated to person. In Hebrew, it's Hashimush ba'adam. Adam is for men and women as well. In English, it's men. And it's also something that we should bear in mind. How come a book that deals, I think, 75% of the book is about women? How come it's called Men? Just to think of it.
That's the author choice.
No, I think that it's something much deeper. I think that it's much deeper than his choice because he chose to write about women. I think it's something maybe the Faculty of Philosophy should deal with it. Philosophy and linguistics. How come that when we refer to women's suffering, we are calling it men? In Hebrew, it's quite better, I think. Right, so the usage of... Right, but but it's not the translation in English. And also no, it's Adam. It's okay. Adam is for men and women as well. No, it goes, usually I'm not very tolerant to Hebrew translations, but this one is very, very good. I think it was done by Dina Katan, right? It's Dina Katan's work. But I wonder why generally when we speak about suffering and sexual abuse of women, we refer to mankind.
Thank you, Lily. Anyone else? Gidon?
Thank you. I would like to refer to Larissa-Marie. Excellent lecture. Thank you. First, small remark concerning one of the SS men you mentioned in the slide you showed. You wrote Forst. This is a mistake. His name was Voss. V-O-S-S.
Okay.
And he was famous for his sexual harassment. Then I would like principally to mention the fact that in Auschwitz, in comparison to other concentration and extermination camps, the direct rapes were very, very minimal because of the conditions and other reasons we have not enough time to elaborate. Then I think you ignored or didn't want to mention the main source for men's sexual attacks in Auschwitz, which is Yechiel Feiner Dinur Katzetnik in his famous People, where he describes the phenomenon of the Funktionshäftlinge, the functionaries, Jews and non-Jews as well, using young boys for their entertainment, let's call it that way. And important to mention is the fact that Jewish women did not work as prostitutes in the brothels. It's very important to mention. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much.
So, anyone else? Okay, and then Yellin.
Thank you very much for all your three presentations. I would like to ask Jovana Savić. Aleksandar Tišma is not the first one in Serbia who wrote about forced prostitution during the Holocaust. And Đorđe Lebović wrote about it 10 years earlier. And I would like to ask you about these two texts and some kind of cultural context stands behind this text. Could you please tell us something more about differences between these two works? Both of them are written by men. They deal with the same topic, but they are different. Could you tell us something more about them, differences, time difference, what happened?
Are you asking if she is comparing the two of them? Or?
No. I asked her about this comparison. I mean, could you, if you know, probably you know about Lutka sa kreveta broj 21. So if you could share with us the context standing behind these two texts, I would be happy to hear something more about it.
Thank you very much for your question. I want to risk here because I'm not very familiar with Đorđe Lebović's work, but he wasn't the only one who wrote about these topics. We also have Danilo Kiš, and I recommend his novel Psalm 44, Psalm 44, which is precisely talking about women and pregnant women in concentration camps. So as I said, I'm not very familiar with Lebović's work and I want to risk there, but thank you.
Good answer. Yoel.
Question to Lily. You mentioned the survivor who was 105 years old, and she reported about something which you will not find in the literature, sex violation of women with dogs. Did she admit being a victim of that, or observer, or was it a rumor? Because, yeah.
Okay. First of all, yes, I tried to find in sources anything connected to her testimony, and I didn't find. She said that she was, as I young girl a victim of such a rape by a dog, and she could never have children, and she said that it's a result of it. But I tried to find evidence and I couldn't. She was in Birkenau and I couldn't. But she was very positive about the clear memory of the dog. Not only the rape, but she said that she can still feel the smell of the dog.
Okay, so I published a book recently that you know.
Yes,
And,
I know.
And there's a chapter there actually which deals with the rape dogs, SS rape dogs. And I think the most comprehensive description of this terrible thing is given in that book by the protagonist of the book, a survivor called Bella Khazan.
Who is your mother?
She is my mother. And before publishing it, of course, I also looked for other testimonies because this looked like something which people may not believe. And I found about 3 more testimonies, which I mention in the book. Then I'm very interested in the one you have, because I don't think it's the one that I found. I also found that this practice was done elsewhere, not only in Auschwitz. For example, Klaus Barbie. There are testimonies that he did the same, trained dogs to do the same type of terrible violation. Thank you.
Okay, just one by one, or if it's related to this,
Would you like to comment?
Because there was another question here.
Boris, no. Let give Boris first, and then.
Thank
I'm
you.
the chair.
Thank you for your presentations. Can one say, on the contrary, that virginity and purity is the condition for the rebirth of a social group or a nation? Purity and virginity, as is a condition for the rebirth or for a social group or a nation. No, it's a question.
So can you... I couldn't understand what's the question.
Is purity, virginity is condition for the rebirth of a nation? This is why we didn't talk about that before.
No, purity is not the condition, but the moment that you are bearing a child who is not from your own nation, it's a clear symbol that you were unpurified. And that's why women that were raped and were pregnant were in a horrible situation, because the rapist usually did not want to be responsible, although in cases of ISIS, for example, we do see that if she wants to submit to be Muslim, then the child is Muslim and she might be saved somehow. But anyway, she couldn't go back to her own family and community.
Thank you so much. I wonder, are you also researching or going to research child abuse? Since they were all 15, 18 or so, and by the definition of the United Nations, it's, they're still child, they're still undergrade.
Yeah, is it a question for me?
For both.
Both of you. I'll go first and then, okay. So as I said, I just started my research and I wrote a paper. It was just for one of my classes. It was around 45 pages. And then I talked about that. For example, when I was looking into sexual exploitation of male victims, then the victims are usually very, very young, often like under the age of 20. And I remember reading about one boy who was, he was 7 or 8 years old. So I will definitely also look into that.
Yeah, because I'm asking because of the fact that we're all saying women, while they're not really women, they're a child. So maybe we will correct the definition.
Yeah.
I must, sorry. You must excuse me, I'm from Beersheba, so I'm half a Savić. But not very polite, not well trained and educated, but they were considered to be young women, and children as children per se, very few survived the camps. For example, if you go to Birkenau, you can't find children. So all the youngsters, 14 or 16 or 14 if she looked strong enough, they were not children. And according to the United law, etc., even at 18 you are a youngster, but you are not a child.
But
a youngster is not a child.
I understand what you're saying, but the law, or by the definition, if they will go to court, they will be considered as children, and maybe
At 18, never.
until 18.
Okay.
Till 18.
Verena?
There was just a few months ago a conference volume published by Helga Amsberger, Helga Embacher, and Dieter Steinert on sexualized violence against underaged men and women, or males and females. And I think it also relates to what Lily said before. If you look at the forced sterilization practice, they started in the legal orders by the Nazis. They looked at the reproductive age, and I think we have to differentiate reproductive age from United Nations codes, and according to the Nazis' orders, reproductive age was 12.
Absolutely.
I forgot one point which I would like to add. Larissa-Marie, you mentioned that the number of women in the language of the camp, Aufseherinnen, was very limited. No, I can't, sorry. However, the 200 or 240, to be more accurate, some of them were very, very active as lesbians. Look, Maria Mandel and her gang. So they were limited in number, but very active sexually. You can read it in many, many testimonies. So not only men were aggressive, women as well.
Thank you.
Can I add something to what Gideon said beforehand about prostitutes in Auschwitz-Birkenau? We have to bear in mind that in each one of the camps, you had a bordel. It was one of the conditions or benefits for the officers that were serving them. But in most of them, despite of legends, rumors, and etc., very few, if at all, Jewish women were used, because not only because of the Nazi law, the purity of blood, but also usually the physical condition of Jewish women were the worst. So they were not used there. So the whole issue of prostitution should be looked in quite different angles. And then, of course, to talk about female bodies used, it's easier than to talk about male bodies. And yes, homosexual practices were very, very spread in most of the camps. One, because there were no women, and then because you were living and serving in such a very different world from the world that you came from and hope to go back for, that those who had hidden instincts, it was the right opportunity to use them. And not only, of course, Nazis and corroborators, but also inmates, ordinary inmates who had a certain more important job. No, for example, those who were responsible of delivering the soup or bread. So if they had those instincts, it was a proper opportunity, proper place to let them free. And then after the war, if they survived, they went back to their so-called normal lives, had wives, children, etc.
I think you said that in Auschwitz, the brothel in Auschwitz or Monowitz was used by SS officers, but it was not. It was meant for prisoners who performed well, couples, and I don't think SS. Well, Gideon probably knows more than me, but I don't think SS officers used the brothel in Auschwitz in Block 24. No. Perhaps they had in other places their own brothels. So that's one comment. The second comment is, again, a semantic one. We had a discussion before. Because I really don't like, personally, when you speak about sex slaves, to call them prostitutes. They were not prostitutes. Of course, in Auschwitz, there were prostitutes. There were professional prostitutes who came from Germany and served as capos or in other functions. Some of them may have been used in the brothels, but I think most of the sex slaves in the brothel in Auschwitz were prisoners who either volunteered or forcibly volunteered to serve there because they were promised they will be released in 6 months and they had better conditions and better conditions
in the border.
Yes, but they were not prostitutes. They were sex
Some
slaves.
of them were, for example, the Puffmutter in Birkenau. She was a very famous prostitute from Germany.
Right. She was a professional prostitute, but not the women who were coerced to work in the brothel in Auschwitz. They were not prostitutes. They were slaves, sex slaves. That's my opinion.
It isn't.
Yes.
It is not connected with the relations, but my question is, what is today the reputation in Israel about the books of Katzenik? It is in this Katzenik, the House of Dolls, that is about the sex slaves. Right. And also, I remember in the 60s in Israel, there was comics about the concentration camps, the stalags, that was about sexual slaves. It was a scandal. It was a scandal. They were censored. They were retired. There is also a documentary about that with the testimony.
Who wants stalags?
Stalags. I was the bitch of Colonel Schultz.
Right.
That was the most famous one. As a high school student, we used to pass it under the desk and read it during class.
Zamir.
So I can talk slower. Thank you all for the fascinating presentation. And I have also actually a 3 short questions for 3 of them. All right. So Lily, as for the book of Primo Levi and the statement of the SS officers, so we know in general that they were right as for almost all the Holocaust survivors. And of course, we well know the story of Mickey Goldman. And when he was asked why he never told about his past, he said that he tried the first time to do that, and then he saw the reaction and decided not to do it anymore. So my question is, can you put your point, on your finger on a point, on a crossroad where we can divide the willing of talk of Holocaust survivors that were raped or Holocaust survivors in general? Because we know it's too tragedy.
Absolutely. I think that there were 2 major turning points in the discussion in the Israeli public in those issues. The first was, of course, the Eichmann trial and all the people who came to share their experience. But I think that the most important thing was the Yom Kippur War, where the Israeli hubris was broken into small pieces, and I think, how should I call, it's again Hebrews, I have no better word, for the Sabras, those who were born in Israel, and they were those who shaped the state, and then the victory in the 6 Days War, and they thought that they are next to God, and then the Yom Kippur War proved the opposite. And I think that the moment, and then also it's a time that already most of the Israelis had televisions, and we saw those brave, strong Israeli soldiers with their hands up when they were taken into custody in the canal, in the Suez Canal. Please, I don't need help, thank you. So I think at that moment was the turning point, and from then we were more tolerant to listen, because if it can happen to a brave soldier who's very well fed and well dressed, and some of them even had their weapons with them, so we can't judge the Holocaust survivors. And me personally, coming from both my parents were Holocaust survivors, I remember it very clearly that suddenly, even the way that I saw my father, for example, may he rest in peace, it was completely changed, because I used to nag him. How did you let your wife and child go to gas chambers? How could you stand? And he always said, you were not at that point. You can't understand. And suddenly, when I saw on television those soldiers who were just 2 years older than myself, I was in high school, then I realized, so this is the turning point.
And it's also the point that the testimonies as for the sexual abuse.
Absolutely, because we became more tolerant to those testimonies.
Larissa, first of all, just a short suggestion. There is a brilliant scholar called Will Jones from Oxford. His PhD just approved, and he's about to publish the book in a few months. And if you want the PhD, just let me know and I'll send it to you. It can be very important for your work. And my question is also close to what I asked. You collected many testimonies.
Yeah.
I guess many of them are coming from Holocaust survivors that lives in Israel. So,
sorry for saying something now, but like not necessarily. I think the big issue with that is that my Hebrew is very limited. So I mainly worked with testimonies from the USC Shoah Foundation and with Yad Vashem, but because I did an internship at Yad Vashem, so I had a lot of time to look at the testimonies, and they were mainly in German, my first language, English, Dutch, but Hebrew, unfortunately,
so
it's not.
We know the Holocaust discourse changed during the years, and I know it as for the Israeli society. And did you notice that even in numbers, the change of those testimony after the Holocaust? I mean, the first decade, the second decade, the third decade. I mean, even in numbers and the details that appears in those testimonies.
Yeah, I think it was Nama Sheikh who wrote about it. She did a great amount of work on sexualized violence in Auschwitz, and then she was saying that basically in the years following the war regarding sexualized violence, there were many testimonies. People spoke out, they said what they had to go through, and they were talking basically without the glasses. They were just talking about it because the social norms and the expectations were not, I mean, they were there, but so, and then I think later people more or less stopped talking about it, and now we're living in a time where the survivors who still live, they talk about it. Yeah, so there is some change.
There is another research which I recommend is by Rochelle Seidel and Sonia Hedgept also wrote a very, very good book about it if you want the details. So I think that the Israeli society just matured and was more tolerant to the testimonies.
But I think more since the 80s.
Yes,
Was,
that's what Lily just explained.
Yeah.
That, okay, anyone else?
Because during the 80s, you know that the first generation,
Yeah.
I mean, they spoke before, but during the 80s, I mean, it was an explosion of
Yes, we know.
testimonies. Yeah.
Yes. Last question, Gidon. Boris, you asked your questions, yes, Boris? Ma?
Nobody answered them.
It's not a question, it's a remark, answering our colleague from Italy. In my eyes, Yechiel Dinur Feiner always was a genius. The only author who takes you with your hand and leads you inside Auschwitz. And happily, I'm really extremely happy that in the recent years, Katzetnik, who was accused in many horrible accusations like pornography, etc., recently gets a very nice rehabilitation and is again worshipped for his genius work. I personally contributed a little to this procedure, and I think he is really a genius in reviving, in reproducing Auschwitz to those who are luckily not there as prisoners or murdered. Thank you.
Okay, last words.
I just want one sentence to Gidon. The problem was not with Yechiel Dinur, with Katzetnik. The problem was the stupidness of scholars and educators who treated his literature as historical facts. And he was a writer, he was not an historian. And that was the problem, and not him.
This is just one problem. There are much more, Lily.
The problem.
Yeah.
Capital.
Well, since the major concentration of Holocaust survivors are in Israel, we have many problems, but we are recovering slowly, but we are recovering. So I would like to conclude this panel saying that it was a very expiring one, and thank you to the three of you. Inspiring. I said inspiring. Whatever. So I'm very excited, and I slept just a few hours. So as long as you understood what I meant, it's fine for me. Okay. Wow. Everyone is on the edge. That's why we are finishing now, to let them have something to drink. Thank you.
Wait, will be back?
So many